Hey guys, welcome to FPG. Today we're gonna continue with The Emperor of Man, Rise of Humanity. Last time we learned a lot of human history, where they're coming from, what has happened, and I hope that this will continue because I'm pretty interested in what is to come. So without further ado, let's get right into it, shall we? Chapter 5, The Age of Strife. Nice rhyme.
As we learned in ancient Eldar lore, it was at this time that the Eldar out in the galaxy would fall into near total destruction.
Not good.
These would be dark days indeed, as the Eldar were almost wiped out in a cataclysmic annihilation as the Chaos god Slaanesh was born into existence from the horrifically depraved mire that Eldar society had fallen into.
Very nice depiction.
This was a disaster for the Eldar, nearly extinguishing their light from the universe completely, but it didn't do humanity any favours either.
Oh, really?
The near destruction of the Eldar and birth of Slaanesh only came to mark the end of the Age of Strife. What caused it prior to these events was the ever-expanding sea of psychic energy known as the Warp.
Yeah.
For many millennia, this had been growing more and more powerful, fueled by the nightmarish depravity that was Eldar society. Around the end of Millennium 24 and the beginning of 25, mankind was still struggling to recover from the disastrous war against its Men of Iron and its far-reaching impact on the previously secure and strong human federation. With their galactic unity destroyed, as well as suffering from the inevitable wounds of war, material shortages, mass loss of life and destruction of infrastructure, we would now face a new problem.
That sucks,
Warp
man.
travel was becoming increasingly difficult.
Oh.
The warp's instability, caused in part by the Eldar's depraved psychic society, meant that many ships now would become lost and consumed.
Oh, I think I know what the solution is. I think they turned the... Not that turn. That sounds like heresy, you know? But they basically turned the Emperor into a guiding unit for warp travel, so his will is basically guiding the ships more or less. That is what I thought of it when I heard the first time what is going on. I might be wrong here, so this is more deep explained lore. I hope he will tell me. Because, yeah, it's basically sounded to me like, you know, he knows every route and his mind is guiding them. It's kind of like a board computer navigating all the airplanes or something like that. Like a terminal, you know, where they say, yep, you can start now, no stop, there's one coming. Like that, navigating them through.
By the warp as they were travelling through. This was not an issue for the Eldar themselves, as they used their webways to travel, which, you know, were outside of that warp space. For humanity, though, it would be a severe problem, and its impact would deal the fatal blow to an already fragile empire.
Let's see how much
the losses and damage caused by the war with the Men of Iron, combined with now being unable to travel across the warp to cross those great distances in the galaxy, would ultimately return humanity to a pre-Dark Age of technology state, where only sublight travel was possible.
That sucks, man.
This was a disaster. Trade and support could no longer be conducted, as these journeys would now take generations to complete.
Rough.
Humanity was once again isolated, as it had been millennia before. The warp storms and the isolation they would create would last for over 5,000 years, and their effect on human society across the galaxy was catastrophic.
They got completely fucked for 5,000 years?
Some planets with a significantly advanced human colony would survive into the future if they had the means to defend and support themselves. It's important to understand that when a system is set up with no established backup, its collapse has an immediate and profound impact. This was the case with mankind's trade system. It had grown over time to enable many planets to survive solely on imports from other rich parts of the human federation. Without this infrastructure and no way to gain outside support, disaster was inevitable. Many would turn inwardly to the colony, consuming themselves from the inside out, first with barbaric civil war and later total anarchy, fighting over the scarce resources that remained. The final phase often led the significantly depleted population into a feudal system of warlords and barbarism.
Man, you know, always when you look at the 40k universe, you think, man, that universe is fucked up. That universe is done for. It sucks. It's completely at the end. But if you look into all the history, all the lore, all the stuff, you see step for step what led them there. You know, in other universes it's just jump, 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 but here you can see, I know there are most likely plot holes, you know, nothing is perfect, but you can really see what led them there, and I think that is a very cool way of doing it. And not just, yeah, it is here now, and we don't know why, and it is how it is, but a history that you can understand and see what led them to this path, basically.
This chaos was repeated across the majority of human worlds in this period, even including Earth. At this time on Earth, large areas across the planet had become massive cities reaching for hundreds of miles, and having become adapted to a system where all activities were conducted by machines, Earth also now relied heavily on trade from colonized worlds to support the extremely high population count. Additionally, much of the planet was no longer capable of food production and hadn't been for millennia.
Are they living in containers?
And expansion in the first place.
That's
With
so
the inability to travel and trade, Earth descended into a similar fate of the less advanced worlds. First panic and general disorder, then food riots, resource hoarding, and finally complete anarchy. The tribal warlord system was all that remained of the few survivors left on Earth, brutal warriors who battled out across the deserts and hives of the remnants of civilization.
Time to devolve, dude.
This whole situation might sound unbelievable that society could collapse so quickly and to such a severe degree, but it's worth considering that in this time, human society had built itself up to be so strong in belief of its own invincibility that they simply did not and could not have anticipated the severity of the warp storm,
society
or
can be
how they would debilitate the trade and support systems that they had been relying upon. Human history is littered with examples of sheer arrogance outweighing logic and reason, as well as blindly staring down dangerous facts in favour of belief in our own self-importance. The lack of planning when it comes to losing their infrastructure across human systems was an acute example of human arrogance.
That makes old time.
It now seems as well that whatever had protected human psyches from demonic possession would now end. It's my speculation that, as previously stated, the Emperor was what provided this shielding, even though he was not known to humanity at this time. For he knew the power, importance and value of human psyches in the dark times that would lie ahead. Without this bubble of protection that had invisibly existed prior to this time, humanity's weak psyches would be consumed, possessed, and go completely insane, causing chaos among isolated, colonized worlds. This period of complete anarchy would last for some 5,000 years, and during this time, many colonies would forget their family out in the galaxy, as well as losing vast amounts of technology and knowledge. Only fragments of the glory of humanity would remain, preserved on the advanced worlds who were capable to survive this dark time. By the 28th millennium, almost all traces of civilization on Earth were gone. Instead, techno-barbarians battled one another over the scraps of the ancient human race.
We went full Mad Max?
Mars, however, was one of the few worlds to undergo a different process. After a brief period of anarchy, the tech priests of the cult Mechanicus emerged victorious over the Psyker mutants, and then unified their homeworld.
Oh, really?
The priests visited Earth, but upon seeing its barren destruction, wrote it off as unsalvageable.
Yeah.
They used any titans they had to help them in the future reunification of man. It would also be one of the few worlds to reach out and recolonize planets in this time. Using their knowledge of the warp, they chose moments of calm amid the storms of the time in the warp to travel through and establish new forge worlds. These were replicas of the tech homeworld of Mars and enabled them to continue support and recovery of the technology of man, as well as production of munitions and simpler war machines. But for humanity, its golden age was over. This dark age of technology had fallen apart catastrophically. Many of the weapons that once served mankind brought us to near destruction and turned lush, garden worlds into irradiated deserts. Mechanical factory worlds into dystopian nightmares, beautifully advanced and artistic colonies turned into barbaric, nightmarish hells devoid of all morality. The age of strife was upon mankind, and only the further darkness of the future lay ahead. Roughly 5,000 years later, around the period of millennium 30 to 31, Human
happened?
society had reached a state of pitiful decay after cannibalizing itself for millennia. The Eldar had also reached the peak of their social decay, and so heralded the agonizing birth of the Chaos god Slanesh,
Hell
who would
yeah.
consume the majority of their population in one cataclysmic event that brought Eldar society to the brink of extinction.
Man, that really was a great time for the 40k universe, wasn't it, huh? As basically everything fell apart. Wow! What a great time to be alive, guys. What a great time. While the orcs, still traveling to space, smashing things, having fun, big smiles on their face, big zook zook. Man, those are really the only guys, really having fun, really pumping out there, really going for it, I can respect that. Those orcs are having just the time of their life.
This horrific event, though, would have a positive outcome for mankind. It consumed all of that stored turbulent warp energy, so after thousands of years of instability, the warp returned to relative calm. Interstellar communication and travel would once again be possible for the civilization of mankind.
That is interesting. So, the creation and birth of Slanesh helped the humanity a lot.
So the Age of Strife was coming to an end, but before we move forward, we need to move back some 2,000 years to M28 to M30. Humanity had now come close to the brink of destruction itself.
Yes.
So many worlds had fallen into disarray, starvation, chaos, anarchy.
Mad Maxing.
Now was the time.
Did
This
it go
would be the
underground?
time where the mysterious and powerful Psyker who had wandered amongst humanity for thousands of years would come to the fore, to lead humanity from an edge of unsalvageable darkness back into the light, and resume their place as a meaningful power in the galaxy.
Oh, really?
Earth had by now been reduced to a chemically irradiated barren wasteland, its population slaughtered, and all that remained were degenerate, feral nomads fighting for irrelevant territories. Insane wandering prophets and cyber-augmented techno-barbarians who lived for nothing other than to fight,
He really took his
created
time.
in the cradle of world-ending war. Frail empires would rise and disintegrate as quickly and forgettably as they had risen. No tribe or faction had enough power or resources to make any meaningful stand, and so it went on, pathetic fighting over the remnants of a ravaged world.
There comes Giga Jesus.
Out of this seemingly endless horror came a single man, a warlord like no other. His title in these early days is unknown, but we would know who he would rise to become: the Emperor of Man. He would first conquer and then rebuild humanity, leading it into the light, saving it from itself to form his autocracy, known as the Imperium of Mankind. Unlike so many before him, though, he had power not only as an unstoppable warrior, but in many other traits such as rational thinking, tactics, philosophy, economics, compassion, foresight, and perhaps most importantly, a genius of science, everything and more that would be required for a supreme leader. The Emperor, though, fought not for selfish personal gain or bloodlust of war like all the other scattered remnants of humanity left on Earth. He had selfless, higher goals to restore humanity spiritually, intellectually, and physically, to revert us to a time of strength and prosperity. These were the years of the Unification Wars. The Emperor had long held a facility deep in a range of mountains previously known as the Himalayas. This was his most significant stronghold and would later become the Imperial Palace. Here he experimented with genetics as well as developing and constructing weapons and armour for his warriors. In the earliest days, he would physically and genetically augment some of the most powerful barbarians. These humanoids would become known as the Thunder Warriors. The very first of their kind and the most basic template for what would eventually become the Imperial Space Marines, the Astartes, the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Under unsurmountable pressure from the Emperor's army of Thunder Warriors, the barbaric factions fell quickly and humanity was united on old Earth for the first time in centuries.
Impressive.
This, however, would come at a terrible cost for the Thunder Warriors themselves, and is one of the least known, yet darkest events for mankind.
Oh.
In order to unify Earth and bring humanity back on the path of advancement and strength, the Emperor had found it necessary to in part cleanse the savagery that had grown on the war-torn planet.
Oh, no.
This sadly meant the death of many arguable innocents during the unification wars, as well as the eradication of the last remaining religious church on Earth, known as the Church of the Lightning Stone. The Emperor is known to have personally spoken to the last remaining priest before bringing in his new age of enforced secular rationalism and the ideology known as the Imperial Truth.
I bet that knowledge is straight forbidden now in the universe, you know? Everyone who knows that fact, if he speaks it, he done for. He done for. You know? It's the history written by the victor. For sure. That, I can see that. I can see that. There must be a lot of, you know, dark past. We don't say anything about it. It is just how it is. And we accept whatever our leaders tell us. There it is in the 40k now. For sure. I don't think anyone really wants the burden of this knowledge. You know.
This essentially tells that humanity are now those destined to be the rulers of the galaxy. The Eldar had their chance and failed, and now humanity are the best set to take their place as the dominant force.
Humanity gonna rise
this
again.
This ideology would soon be brought to all the scattered worlds of humanity in the long crusade that was yet to come.
Ooh.
Now, the official version of things tells how the last battle of the Unification Wars takes place on Mount Ararat. This siege to cleanse the last of the techno-barbarians from the ruined wastes on Earth and finally bring it back to a time of peace and growth was said to be so brutal that waves of Thunder Warriors fell against the rocks in resistance, were slain to a single man, the legendary warrior Arik Taranis, the Lightning Bearer. He would raise the banner of lightning to mark the end of the Unification Wars, setting in place the rule of the Emperor of Man, before he too would fall to fatal wounds suffered in this battle of legend.
Though. Who knows?
As with many things, the official version is not the end of the story.
Ah, there it is.
The actuality of the event was darker and far more sinister.
There it is.
The Emperor knew that in order to restore peace, growth, and a sense of civilization to his new and expanding empire, he would require a more stable and balanced force than
Did he
the Thunder
sacrifice
Warriors,
all of
who were
them?
essentially just adept brutes recruited from the wasteland, albeit clad in the earliest Imperial armor. In a necessary betrayal, the Emperor realized that in order to safeguard what he had achieved, his army of barbaric
The Order
fighters could
66,
not exist past this time. It is believed that he actually ordered the many Thunder Warriors who had survived the final battle to be slaughtered by his elite guard, and possibly even some of the early proto-Astartes, who were at this time far advanced beyond most of his standard force.
Shit,
This
dude.
terrible secret has been concealed from the people of the Imperium for more than 10,000 years. And were it ever to be revealed, the consequences could be unimaginably disastrous.
I guess so.
The Emperor, though, saw this necessary evil had to come to pass for the greater good, a sacrifice of the few
Always,
to save
man.
the many who would come. The Thunder Warriors were built for war, and war alone, and
always
would not
that
be able
way.
to adapt to a time of peace, and could even have turned a vital tool into a dangerous, unstable threat that could unbalance all that he had achieved. In order for the next stage of his plans, he also required that humanity rally behind him as the sole and most powerful force. The slaughter of the Thunder Warriors was not the last act of betrayal, though, by the Emperor. He would then take the
Really?
necessary glory that he had near single-handedly reunified Terra. This distortion of the truth, while hugely distasteful, does appear largely necessary to reunite the whole of humanity and create the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. Nonetheless, should the truth ever arise, it would at best split apart the Imperium and at worst destroy it.
Oh god.
These choices by the Emperor are important to remember in the context of his character, as it can lead to certain logical speculations regarding future events. Some Thunder Warriors, though, would
Is there a
follow
belly
fate
window
on
in
their
his...
side and escape
What?
this mass killing and live on as homeless unknowns, seeking out a miserable existence at the bottom of society. Honours forgotten, their deeds meaningless,
Got
all the
fucked.
while fearing constant discovery from the Imperium and certain death. This heartless betrayal was surely one of the darkest periods in Imperial history. They were never hunted, though, in any significant way. The Emperor believed them all dead, and besides, there were far more important tasks at hand, as the Emperor now gathered a team of gene wrights salvaged from the few remaining humans on Earth. These were men with practical knowledge of genetics to aid in his development of the new Astartes project. Those Thunder Warriors who did escape were not like the Astartes of the 41st millennium. They were genetically unstable, and most significantly, they only had a minimally extended mortality beyond that of a regular human, unlike the Space Marines who can live on for thousands of years.
Oh.
The Emperor had been working
Built-in
for
obsolescence,
decades
huh?
on his Astartes project, deep within his mountain facility. Here he would create the vital foundations that would springboard humanity into a new age. His experiments would create the 20 Space Marine legions, known as the Legiones Astartes, as well as 20 Primarchs, to lead each legion. These 20 supreme leaders of the
Man, I really wonder if he will talk about the second Primarch. I can't wait to hear about the second Primarch. That will be very interesting, won't it?
soon-to-come Space Marine legions were crafted by the Emperor using samples of his own arcane genetic code as the base. It is obviously unknown the depth of which the Emperor used his own DNA to create the Primarchs, but later findings through ancient Imperial records do hint that he spliced multiple DNA types together, even going so far as to introduce some animal DNA into the Primarchs. This would explain why some, such as Lehman Russ, would display the wolf-like qualities, and why these would then become present throughout the Space Wolves Legion and chapter. It is difficult to speculate on the Emperor's true goals here, and even if he was successful in the mixing of DNA in this way, it seems highly experimental, and perhaps he himself was not sure of the final result. This period of intelligent design was hasty and somewhat improvised given the dire situation facing mankind. It needed to repopulate its military power in order to springboard and take stage fights forward to reconquer the colonies. Another point of speculation is how closely the Primarchs were imbued with spiritual elements and others such as unnaturally skillful charisma and so on. Still though, in creating the Primarchs and even taking small elements of the Emperor's DNA, it imbued them with these demi-godlike characteristics. It also explains why at this time the barely known forces of chaos would seek out and scatter the developing Primarchs before the Emperor's plans could grow into fruition. Little is known of this Primarch scattering event, but it has been suggested that the dawning forces of chaos felt this expanding power from humanity to threaten them, and in an effort to slow or negate it, they reached out into the mortal world to seize and scatter the fetal Primarchs across the galaxy. Each world they found themselves on would surely in time come to realise that they were far from normal, often finding themselves as a natural leader in command of the systems that would become their home. Later the Emperor would one by one discover and reunite the Primarchs with their legions, establishing one of the most powerful military forces the galaxy had ever seen. The Thunder Warriors, though, were undoubtedly the early prototypes for the Astartes project, which subsequently makes their untimely end all the more tragic, as their sacrifice was so great, yet the memory of them was totally obliterated.
Wiped from
the Astartes project would continue in a pragmatic manner. Each of the early legions at this time contained barely a few hundred marines. Their equipment was lightweight and somewhat improvised by comparison to later standards. They trained their minds and bodies to be the will, might and rule of the Emperor. Time would pass and their numbers grew. Each legion was divided not only for organisational reasons but also for practical reasons. Because of their adapted genetics that were drawn from the Primarchs, some carried traits and psychological behaviours which would not have been found comfortable in comparison with their sibling legions. This segregation also allowed them to focus their bonds to their brothers in their own legion, creating a near unbreakable kinship between Astartes. If the newly created Astartes would be the Emperor's scalpel, his gleaming pinnacle of human achievement, then the Thunder Warriors were certainly a mace used to bludgeon the remnants of humanity back into submission. The Thunder Warriors were genetically stronger though, tougher, and could even be stronger in battle than the newly created Astartes, which is something people often forget.
Really?
They were a rough, brutal instrument, but ultimately a temporary solution to a violent problem. The Space Marines would serve not only as a weapon, but as beacons to mankind, a glimmer of what humanity could hope to be. The dark times to come, however, would show that this was a misplaced belief, that while the Space Marines were created to represent the pinnacle of human development, they ultimately proved as susceptible to the basic flaws of mankind as any other mortal.
Oh no. But I think that is pretty well thought out, you know? For the rough job, you need the rough tools, and then, you know, now it's time to get rid of them and rebuild humanity, do operations a little more, you know, precise. So you have to get rid of it, and that's the way history or stories, good stories often go, with those secrets in history, all hidden, pushed under the rock, you know, it is what it is. But I think it's a very well built up, made story. I really like the build up, you know. It is well thought through, I think, for my part at least. Most universes don't really have that kind of depth, so I'm pretty happy to see it here. But, you know, from the people I see in the comments everywhere, it is obvious why so many people love the series, love the stories, love the intense detail of the lore especially, even though, you know, if another franchise, you know, their games wouldn't be that good, I don't think the people would love it that much, but Warhammer 40k fans basically forgive their failures in some of the games and stuff like that, and they just take the universe for what it is, you know, as a whole, not just segregated parts, but rather the whole thing, and then it's just worth it, you know? It's just worth it for the people. That's cool.
The Emperor's campaign on Earth
really cool.
would now come to a close.
Ooh,
he began
really?
establishing the fundamental elements of a civilized, modernized society in government administration, economy, and infrastructure. An important figure in this process was a man known as Malkador, the Sigillite. He had a vast knowledge of such matters and carried himself with the bearing of a priest. He was appointed to run the courts and palaces of the new empire, the right-hand man of the Emperor. Earth would turn from a place of desolation and horror to one of active production, rebuilding, and planning.
Well,
some might call it coincidentally convenient, but at this time a vast shockwave would travel through the galaxy. The birth of Slaanesh. Humanity would have no idea of the significance of this, only that it cleared the storms from the warp that had isolated and ruined humanity's gloriously technologically advanced empire. Again though, we could speculate that the Emperor had foreseen these events and the necessity of preparing Earth for this time. On Mars, the humans of the cult Mechanicus, that is those who worship machines, would become aware of this unification on Earth, as information through distant communication and physical observations. They viewed this new emperor as a man in alignment with their own agenda. Mars, during the Dark Age of technology, had been a planet with a single purpose, a powerhouse of production for this age, consolidating ships and weapons, including the vast Titans, hundreds of feet tall, gigantic bipedal war machines whose very presence could end conflicts before they began.
Hell yeah.
Since the end of this age, cults had risen across the Mars, and the most prevalent of these was the Mechanicus, whose ideology included the veneration and acquisition of these ancient but highly advanced technologies from the period known as the Dark Age of technology.
Pray to the machine,
During the period of isolation known as the Age of Strife, Mars had undergone a similar societal collapse comparable to that of Earth. With all trade cut off, they had insufficient water and food to supply the populace. A civil war would follow, as well as the collapse of some planetary infrastructures that shielded their little remaining hydroponics and food production systems. This would lead to a further collapse of the already fragile supporting systems.
They look so fucked up, man.
The techs an established Mechanicum decided the best way to survive this apocalypse would be to retreat into underground bunkers which had been mined out, creating vast cities below the surface. Little is known at this time, but evidently prior to their...
I really don't know what it is, but usually every universe, if you go to Mars, maybe it is because we have seen pictures of Mars and people think, yeah, so there can't be anything on Mars. It has all to be underground. So in every single sci-fi universe, everything going on, it's always the people living in Mars, in some kind of cave system, underground, anywhere. It's always in Mars, never on Mars. I don't know why, I guess that's why.
Seclusion, the Mechanicum techs were a cult who would bear a respect and drive to recover, protect and utilise the lost technologies of mankind. Upon their rise from the subterranean depths, they had in this time translated this over into a complete faith. The tech priests of the Mechanicum, along with their troops, would very quickly subdue the insane irradiated savages who remained on the surface and begin the process of rebuilding and redeveloping Mars to be completely self-sufficient. This, in combination with their access to some of the most powerful war machines ever forged in the galaxy, would without doubt leave the Mechanicus in a position of some power. To the cult of Mechanicus, who were now becoming aware of this Emperor figure who had surfaced on Terra, a man of science and technology, this was obviously appealing to the Mechanicus, and some tech priests on Mars even began to suggest that the Emperor was a man of such power as to rival their own machine god and fulfill an ancient prophecy in their faith of techno-mysticism. Debates raged on Mars between the priesthood regarding how to treat this new development. All the while, the Emperor, bearing his power of immense foresight, would not be ignorant of the Mechanicum, and he slowly and steadily would begin to craft his new plans accordingly. Plans for a crusade on a galactic scale never before seen. Its purpose? To locate the lost Primarchs, to reunite the territories of humanity, forge a new Imperial Empire, and thrust the Imperium of Man into a position of complete dominance and power throughout the galaxy.
Thrust them into dominance. There it is.
The Emperor's plan was one of absolute submission. Anyone who stood against the Imperial truth would be cleansed and destroyed. The Mechanicum of Mars were one of the few exceptions. The Emperor knew that any battle to try and claim dominance over the cult Mechanicum would be hugely counterproductive. Even if he could claim victory over them, the cost to his new Astartes force would be severe and unjustified.
Very smart,
so
very
he planned
wise.
instead to offer a rare alliance with the Council of Tech Priests. In offering them assistance in their own goals and acquisitions of new and lost tech throughout the galaxy, they would provide support, construction of war gear and tech to Imperial forces. They also were one of the exceptional entities to be allowed to maintain a state of semi-independence within the Imperium, a fairly unique position. The Emperor would also provide a new group of navigators to enable the Mechanicum to travel through the warp again in search of fabled STC units. All of this suited the Mechanicum and Imperium in a symbiotic relationship, and an alliance was created.
Well. Great Crusade. Fall of the Eldar. Haven't they suffered enough?
And so we reach the beginning of Millennium 31.
Man.
With Mars now allied to the
bastards.
Emperor's Imperium, the Legiones Astartes war machine had significantly expanded. The Mechanicum would provide the battle barges needed to transport the Space Marines throughout the galaxy. They also brought to the table the Titans, some of the most powerful war machines ever created. Their very presence on approaching a humanoid system would often be enough to prevent a conflict. The shock and awe of facing such incomprehensible opponents would quickly lead a populace to understand they had no hope of preventing the Imperial Expeditionary Forces from achieving their goals. The crusade would initially be led by the Emperor himself, as he commanded a massive fleet of Astartes. As the crusade gathered pace and the Primarchs were recovering...
if I could, I would just buy so many different Titans and mount them behind me. Because they look so cool, they're so huge, they look so nice. I really would like that, but funds. But yeah, man, I wish I could. They're so sick, so sick.
These expeditionary
So many good
fleets
designs
would number
in
in the
this universe.
thousands. Before we talk about the Crusade itself though, which I have tried to condense as much as possible, I want to first talk briefly on the Astartes or Space Marines. Now, a regular misconception about Space Marines is that because they wear near identical armour and were originally produced via a variation of cloning, or at least grown in a lab, that they somehow have no personality or little differentiation between them. It is also often assumed that Space Marines will blindly follow any commands given to the letter, no matter the consequences. After all, they are the superior, unquestioning warriors in the universe, right?
Hell yeah, they are. Hell
is fundamentally wrong. Each Space Marine is an individual person with their own character, traits, to an extent personal principles.
Oh yeah, I mean,
there are many documented events in which these human...
Especially felt that in Hell's Reach so far, you know? With Grimaldus and his boys, basically. It really felt like they're all the individual person, very different. They all, you know, are pretty loyal, bound by honor, everything like that. But they're pretty different people with all their own views in some kind of way, at least. It's nice. It's nice. It doesn't always have to be, you know, this dispensable clone army in every sci-fi universe. There can be more, and it can be pretty cool because I've seen it.
Elements would have a role to play in subsequent events. Space Marines, although superhuman, are still human, and as such the Emperor deemed it necessary to have a senior position with whom Astartes could use as a point of reference to discuss matters of morality, to understand their purpose, their mission, and sometimes to give guidance beyond purely military matters during the Crusade and the expeditionary forces. Enter the Iterators.
What?
Imperial Iterators were the most persuasive of public speakers. They are masters of manipulating a crowd's opinion, and Iterators would counsel also Marines as they voyaged through the galaxy. But their role went beyond this and was critical at the inception of the Great Crusade. They were placed among the expeditionary forces to aid in reuniting humanity and turning lost human civilizations to the Imperial cause. The Emperor appointed them to spread the Imperial truth. Truths such as the rejection of religious faith to enforce secular rule, and unnecessary wasteful squabbling over power and resources. These were all seen as significantly counterproductive.
For those who have seen it, they remind me a lot of the, what were they called? The Priors from very old Stargate, the later seasons, the Priors of the Ori, I think they were called. It reminds me of that. Just with, you know, floating skulls with megaphones. That is pretty silly, actually. I like that image a lot. But they remind me of them.
And opposite to the objectives of the Imperium. The first Primarch to be reunited with the Imperial fleet was Horus of the Lunar Wolves. He greatly admired the Iterators' work, so much so that he asked them to also tutor his captains.
Good boy Horus, huh?
Horus believed that once the Crusade was completed, there would be an end to the war, and that the Astartes would first need to find a peacetime vocation.
Yeah, vacation time with Horus.
During the Great Crusade was primary Iterator Kyril Sindaman, who served aboard.
And I hope there's a fun picture out there after this. You made modeled after this with all the primaries chilling on the beach. Vacation with Horus, man. Would love to see it.
Horus's flagship. Iterators are seen as the precursors to Imperial Guard commissars and Astartes chaplains. The Iterators and then later the chaplains are an example of the more human services required by Space Marines. Documented records have shown that they have been regularly known to question ethics, purpose, and even their own morality, despite an Astartes essentially being immortal. They are destined to die in battle, as that is their true purpose. And despite this predefined fate, they are far from the emotionless drones that some would assume. They are a living embodiment of humanity, a distillation of spirit and mind. The Emperor's Great Crusade to reunify humanity had begun in earnest. This was an operation on a truly epic scale. Millions of troops, tens of thousands of ships forged by the Mars Mechanicum. This would be humanity's defining moment, to reach out and forge the greatest empire in the galaxy. The Imperial forces comprised soldiers, naval officers, and most importantly, the Astartes legions. They were configured and divided into expeditionary fleets supported by all manner of cruisers, transports, scout teams, dropships, and so on. Commanded by the Emperor and his war council, but also by individuals placed in charge of these expeditionary forces. It's important to remember that these forces were as much exploratory as they were tasked with an important mission. A great deal of time had passed during the Age of Strife, as well as incalculable quantities of data had been lost in the process. The Imperial forces simply didn't know exactly where all the colonies were, nor their status. Had they been destroyed in civil war, alien genocide, or perhaps the opposite, and expanded to a degree where they would not need aid, but instead submission?
Oh, I'm pretty interested. Are there stories out there, you know, of the different colonies that found some very crazy stuff they found out there? That would be cool to know. I think I would dig a story like that, you know? Following the Astartes on their exploration, finding out what happened with all those colonies. That could be a pretty cool story. You could make, I always say, a cool game out of it, but you know, not only a cool game, also very cool stories. I think that would be a pretty interesting narrative to follow.
All of these were unknowns. Many locations could be estimated as to whether or not they had been colonized in the past. The Mechanicum could provide some information from past scripture as to where human colonies had been located, although more importantly, they wanted to know where we could find ancient and undiscovered technology.
Let's go.
The expeditionary fleet would even initiate a search on the basis of myths and rumour. No stone was to be left unturned in the search for the lost civilizations of mankind.
That's cool.
Before they embarked on their journey though, one other important task was required. Although the warp storms had subsided, allowing travel once again across great distances, the navigator class from the past that would guide ships through the warp. This system, though, was far from perfect, and the Emperor had a greater plan. On Earth, the Emperor ordered construction of the Great Astronomicon. Tech priests from Mars were drafted in to aid in this project, and its purpose would be to enable the Emperor to guide, oversee, and command his vast fleet, all from Terra. It created a system for him to focus, amplify, and broadcast psychic signals and energy. It would stand as an unchanging marker, a lighthouse for the navigators, a point of reference around which they could plan all their travels. This certainly was an important factor in the success of the Crusade, as it enabled the navigators to travel through the warp in great leaps and faster than they ever had done before. In addition to this, the Emperor would also create the Astropaths. These were powerful psychers whose sole task would be in relaying communications from the fleet and later the established Imperium back to the ruling council on Terra. The vast distances involved meant that the Astropaths would become the only communication link between Terra and the distant colony.
So Astropaths are basically the Emperor's walkie-talkie system. Basically. I put one on the ship, you know. Yeah, you are my walking messenger. You will hear from me. Now go. Bye.
However, as with the Eldar, the risk of possession to the Astropaths by warp demons consuming the Psychers and thereby enabling them to travel into the material world was one that the Emperor was all too aware of.
Oh shit.
Especially after his Primarchs had been scattered throughout the galaxy. Shit. To this end, the Astropaths would undergo an extreme and harsh process of toughening against the threat of warp entities. The Emperor himself would manipulate and reform their mind into a protective vessel, making them nearly immune to risks from the warp. This process, though, was agonizing and extremely dangerous. Many Psychers were killed in the process or went completely insane. Even if they survived the process, a universal effect would see their optic nerves become damaged beyond repair. This meant all Astropaths are blind. From the Imperial perspective, though, this was a necessary consequence as they continued to be an integral part of Imperial infrastructure. The Crusades had begun, and alongside Space Marines were hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Imperial troops, humans who were salvaged from the aftermath of terror and structured into an effective, albeit expendable fighting force. This Imperial Guard was strengthened and resupplied as they reconnected and conquered lost human colonies. A secondary benefit was that in drafting local military forces into the expeditionary force, it removed these planets' ability to rebel effectively against the newly created Imperial outposts on each planet. Also, in these early days, taxes and tribute to the Imperium were not strictly...
that's the guy from... is it him? The guy from Armageddon? Is that him? The guy who, lost his arm and everything? Is that the guy? I think it is.
Required, but Imperial commanders stationed on new colonies of the Imperium would often require supplies for the continuing crusade. Many systems and colonies would need help rebuilding or periods after generations of schooling by iterators to bring them in line and around to the Imperial truth and loyalty to the Imperium.
Well,
some worlds, though, who were self-sufficient had survived intact and would even welcome the arriving Imperial forces with open arms as long-awaited brothers, with glorious celebrations and immediate support, much to the satisfaction and pride of the expeditionary forces who were all too happy to welcome their brothers back to the Imperium.
Hell yeah.
Such events were a blessing to behold, though, as many worlds were either barren wastes long since destroyed, with only ruined remains to prove that anyone had ever existed there. Or they were found to be locked in brutally tyrannical dictatorships and required sometimes days, often weeks of orbital and ground assault to subdue and conquer these false dictators. Religious doctrine and faith were especially highlighted to be crushed on all worlds. The Emperor would never allow these practices to infringe or...
Oh yeah, they were split before the religion was torn down, right? So they might be under very strict religious leadership, which is pretty opposite to, the plans of the Emperor. Well, they're fucked. That's cool, man. That's cool, though. Those are some interesting stories, I think, if you dig into them. Did they just large-scale everything, or there's this spy undercover legion, basically, of people, so they could infiltrate some of them, maybe, but I guess they all large-scale them, but that would be pretty cool for a story.
Threaten the Imperium, as he was partly responsible and had even seen the effects these caused on humanity millennia ago in the first age of mankind. The Emperor also made an important choice that upon arrival to new worlds, any psychers discovered were told to expect transport back to Terra, courtesy of secretive black ships. Here, they would be tested on their journey back to Earth to their limit. They would endure nightmarish examination, some dying from the trials or executed for being just too unstable. Others, though, ended up completely losing their minds in the process of these harsh examinations. The fate of these individuals was at the time unknown. It later transpired that if they were proven strong and capable enough in manipulating their psychic power, they would become stock for creating new astropaths by the Emperor. Any younger but highly powerful psychers were subsequently distributed to some of the Space Marine legions who had begun a Librarius program, creating special Astartes who are capable of wielding immense psychic power. Others, though, disappeared from record entirely, leading to supposition of secret organisations who even today are not fully disclosed. The Crusade continued for centuries, stretching out across the galaxy. Finally, the Primarchs were reunited with their legions and were duly given positions on the Crusade and Imperial War Council. The Primarch figures, though, were not suited to this level of administration. They were at their best out among their Marines leading campaigns.
Did some of them really have a halo, or is that just, artistic design choices later, you see them from the past and they draw a halo there, or did they really, it was said that he gave them some godlike appearances and abilities, so did some of them really have a halo, or is that just, decoration or artistic choice to draw them like that?
So it fell to the administrators of Man to run the day-to-day Crusade infrastructure. One important figure arises again, that of Malcador the Sigillite. He would become a keystone in the execution of the Crusade and one of the most loyal and valuable members of the Imperial Council. The power of the Imperium had now reached its peak. There seemed to be little, if anything, that could threaten, damage or destabilise the glory and power of the now reunited Imperium of Man.
That
The
sort looks
Crusade
like
had in fact been
Frostmourne,
so
man.
successful that after a chain of impressive victories, the Emperor decided he could fully return to Terra to continue managing his plans there and working on new secret projects. His Primarchs were surely more than capable of finishing the now simple task of scouting and securing any fringe colonies and bringing the Crusade to a successful conclusion. After a specifically great victory on Ulanor, the Emperor selected the first Primarch and commander of the Lunar Wolves, known as Horus Lupercal, and bestowed upon him the title of War Master. This title established him as a leader of the Imperial military forces in lieu of the Emperor, and all other Primarchs and Imperial forces would follow the War Master's commands as if they were the Emperor's.
Guys, surely nothing bad will come out of that. Surely you can't trust Horus. He's a good guy. He will follow whatever his father says. It is very good to give him a lot of power. Surely nothing will go wrong, man. Surely.
Not all the other Primarchs seemed to be entirely comfortable, not only with this decision, but also with the Emperor's choice to leave them and return to Terra. Considering their strength of character, this seems somewhat surprising, but if anything it shows that their bond they shared with the Emperor was perhaps not rock solid, and some of them felt bewildered he should choose to leave them on the fringes of the galaxy when overall victory seems so near and so secure. Horus, whilst being a supreme master of military matters, was also less well known for being exceptionally tactful and charismatic. He would take time to speak to each of his brother Primarchs in turn. Understanding them as he did, he would employ his various skills of perception and charisma to appeal to their individual natures and reassure them that although the Emperor had granted him this glorious honour, it was the brotherhood together who would achieve the ultimate victory. This helped quell some of the disquiet, but it was not only the Primarchs who felt bemused that the Emperor had abandoned them, and in time, this in combination with other unfortunate events would lead to the darkest of catastrophes. In fact, there have been many examples throughout human history where withholding information would lead to disaster, and this period for humanity would be no exception. The Emperor's decision to not make his Space Marines aware of the dark forces of chaos for their own benefit. In fact, even to this day, the vast majority of the Imperial citizenship lives blissfully unaware of the darkness that lies in the immaterial.
Really?
The Emperor's precise
most of humanity doesn't know about chaos, that they're out there, real demons fucking about, killing corrupted. What the fuck? That's messed up, dude. That's so. I mean, you know, it suits Warhammer 40k, but that's messed up, man.
Reasons for this are not crystal clear. Perhaps he felt that humans were too easily persuaded or tempted by the promises of quick, easy power. But whatever the reason, the consequences for the Primarchs and Space Marines to not be able to see this danger, as well as the Imperium, would be disastrous. The Astartes legions had encountered vague clues and shrouded warnings on some lost human worlds they encountered. Whispers in the wind, apparent possession of Marines. Horus and his Lunar Wolves discovered direct evidence of some dark force when they encountered a lost but highly advanced human colony known as the Interex in the later stages of the Expeditionary Crusade. As the fleet travelled to the Interex homeworld, they engaged in extended, peaceful negotiations. Again, this was an example of the Space Marines and notably Horus not giving preference to immediate combat, but in choosing a peaceful option. If this was viable to them, it was always preferable. Their mission of Imperial Truth was without question. It was the only resolution that would ever be acceptable to the fleet, though. Now, during this encounter, Garviel Loken, who was the Lunar Wolves' 10th captain and a member of the Mournival, was a close and under Imperial rule illegal clique of brothers, but one which Horus had allowed to exist so as to help advise him on matters of importance. Loken was among the War Master's party when they attended a reception with these Interex during negotiations. He was drawn into a casual conversation with one of the Interex's guard, who admitted that the Interexs had learned to tread carefully with any newcomers to their people because they feared the taint of chaos, with a K, on these newcomers.
Oh no.
It becomes apparent that the Interex colony had made dealings with the Xenos race, the Eldar, during the Age of Strife, and the Interex explain how it is their understanding from what they could discern from the Eldar that chaos is a threat like no other. That it would not appear brutal or blunt at first, but subtly. They feared chaos deceptively approaching their space, posing as a friend, seeking to bleed its way into their confidences,
Scheming.
and then destroy them mercilessly from the inside out. Loken was shaken at these unknown revelations, and the Warmaster Horus would later assure him that there is no fundamental evil in the galaxy.
There's no such thing, man.
But the seeds of suspicion are planted. Loken cannot shake this feeling that something, somewhere, is wrong. But before he'd have any opportunity to follow up and explore these doubts, a break-in occurs in one of the Interex's most sacred museums, and a highly advanced blade known as an anatheme is stolen. At this time, despite Horus's pleas for restraint, negotiations would now collapse, and the Lunar Wolves and the advanced Interex would fall into all-out conflict.
Oh
The
shit.
Space Marines of Horus are
Over one
ultimately
blade.
victorious over the Interex, but it's a victory Horus takes no pleasure in, as it's born out of misunderstanding and was a tragic, unnecessary conflict. These events, though, would become...
Did Chaos instigate this? Of course. You know, after we mentioned them for so long, of course. Some agent scheming pulled the blades to set up their war, to, you know, make them eradicate each other. That's fucked up, man. But that is chaos. Chaos.
Come just a singular fragment in a deteriorating pattern of troubles that would haunt and gesticulate within Horus, as well as his unease then irradiating out into his brother Primarchs, the Mournival, his and other legions. Unbeknownst to Horus, a sequence of events had been now initiated, and their cascade could not be prevented. So why are these events...
Oh, so Chaos started these events to drive Horus away from, you know, his belief in his father and stuff like that. Man, I was really slow on picking that up. I was really slow.
so important? Well, for one, it gives more insight into the fact that at the time it seems barely any Space Marines at any level of rank had any knowledge of chaos. And if they did, it was only the vaguest of suspicions, the kind that could easily be brushed off by speaking to, say, some iterators. They had no idea about the true nature or capabilities of the malevolent force known as chaos. By comparison, the Emperor understood all too well the dark forces that had very recently annihilated the Eldar and consumed so many human colonies throughout the Age of Strife. It seems strange that he would choose not to gift his Astartes, and more importantly his Primarchs, with this information so that they could best protect against its darkness. But perhaps he feared that knowledge of the warp entities would do more harm than good, instead choosing ignorance as the best policy. However, a combination of time, doubt, rejection, jealousy, and greed brewing in corners of the Astartes legions.
I like how they weave history and, repeating history, mistakes of the past, of humanity, into the story. So it makes a lot more sense, that there are parts that happened also in history, or make stuff just a little more realistic, even though, I always say realistic, but looking at a 40k universe, what is realistic? That is for everyone to decide, I would say, but it's pretty crazy out here. But I like that. It just gives it, little bit more deep, little bit more interesting. I like it. It is very nice design choice.
Would prove this to be an unwise decision.
Yep. Bad decision, dude. You done fucked up. Well, that ended in a rather huge cliffhanger, I would say. It is pretty interesting. Also, I think it's crazy that he, put 1.5 hours of pure lore, not slowing down, just shooting out lore and lore and lore, compact information, really. It's 1.5 hours, and I don't know how much of the way there, there's still a lot left. and we even left on a huge cliffhanger, one of the biggest events. I thought it could be in here somewhere, but the whole event is missing, so man, there seems a lot more to come. But I like how it's built up, showing all the history, all the steps, where it led, not going too deep into everything, not picking up every detail, but getting the key points, hitting it real good. I think Luton has a great pace here. He really does amazing work in cutting that stuff together and making it as compact mostly as possible, but it's still, 1.5 hours, and there's a lot more to go. So we will go a lot further in the future. That's all, and I'm out for now. Bye!